Hello guys! Mapagpalayang araw sa lahat. So, kamusta? Sana masarap ang inyong tulog kanina and sana masarap ang inyong ulam ngayon. So, today we will be discussing the topic number 10, which is Sikolohiyang Pilipino under our subject Ethics 1. But before I start, let me just introduce to you first my group mate. So our team, first you can see here, we have here Shane Caliguiran, also me. My name is Keren Happuch, you can call me Keren. And we have here Cheza Fronda. Also we have here Aizle Catain, Jella Gregori, Patalbo, and of course Gabriel Purzuelo. So we will be the one who will be discussing for today's lesson. Now, to continue, we will be setting first our lesson objectives, okay? So first, the students should be able to know what Sikolohiyang Pilipino is and its background. Number 2, the students should be able to identify the basic elements and features of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Last is the students should be able to learn how SP was developed and how it impacted the Filipinos. Alright, so since we already set our objectives for today's discussion, now let's dive into our agenda for today. So number 1, we have here Sikolohiyang Pilipino. And for the subtopics, it's the beginning of Sikolohiyang Pilipino, what is Sikolohiyang Pilipino, and lastly, Virgilio Enriquez, the pioneer of SP, or who is Virgilio Enriquez. Next, number 2, we have here basic elements of SP. 1 is defining SP. Second, 4 filiations, and third is the characteristics of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Number 3 is development of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. We have here development of indigenous concepts and theories, development of indigenous personality measures, and lastly, development of indigenous research methods. Number 4 is psychology. And under this are the topics about impact of teaching psychology in the Philippines, areas of application of Sikolohiyang Pilipino, and lastly, associations and conferences. So last in line is number 5, the spread of Sikolohiyang Pilipino outside the Philippines, and also Sikolohiyang Pilipino in the realm of universal world psychology. So yun lang for today. Yun ang those are the topics that we will be discussing for today. Alright, so to give you a quick overview to Sikolohiyang Pilipino, it is often known as Filipino psychology in English, and it is a branch of psychology that was developed based on the experience, thoughts, and orientation of Filipino and fully utilizes their culture. So for the first chapter, Sikolohiyang Pilipino, we will be defining what Sikolohiyang Pilipino is, where did it begin, and who is Virgilio Enriquez, okay? So first one, the beginnings of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. As you can see, there is a timeline. So in 1960s, many Filipino intellectuals and scholars were already sensitive both to the inadequacy as well as the unfairness of the Western-oriented approaches to psychology. However, there was no concerted effort in the 1960s to reject and correct the traditional way of teaching and studying psychology. In 1970s, Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez returned to the Philippines from Northwestern University, USA, with a PhD in social psychology, and lost no time in introducing the concept of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Together with the then chairman of the Department of Psychology at UP, Dr. Alfredo V. Lagmay, Enriquez embarked on research into the historical and cultural roots of Philippine psychology. In 1975, Enriquez already chaired the unang pambansang komperensya sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, or the first national conference on Filipino psychology, which was held at the Abelardo Auditorium at UP. And in this conference, the ideas, concepts, and formulation of Sikolohiyang Pilipino were formally articulated. So I've been mentioning Sikolohiyang Pilipino, but what is it? Okay, what is Sikolohiyang Pilipino? Right? To define SP, we can say, Enrique said that it is anchored on Filipino thought and experience as understood from a Filipino perspective. 2, it is the study of diwa, psyche. So diwa is a wealth of ideas referred to by the philosophical concept of essence and an entire range of psychological concepts from awareness to motives to behavior. So what are the objectives of Sikolohiyang Pilipino? 1, to contribute to universal psychology, and number 2, to foster national identity and consciousness and social involvement and the psychology of language and culture. Okay, so what are the bases of SP? 1, assessing historical and social cultural realities. 2, understanding the local language. 3, unraveling Filipino characteristics. And lastly, explaining them through the eyes of the native Filipino. Alright, so now, who is Virgilio Enriquez? I've already mentioned him earlier, but who is he, right? So, he is also known as Doc E. He is a social psychologist and also known for being the father of Filipino psychology. So, he founded the Pambansang Samahan ng Sikolohiyang Pilipino, and he was born in the province of Bulacan, Philippines. So, as you can see here, the timeline, you can pause the video and scan the timeline from 1963 up to 1997. So as you can see, he garnered a lot of awards. And next is the publications in indigenous psychology. So Enriquez have published a lot of books and articles. So as you can see here. So that's it. That's Virgilio Enriquez, who is the pioneer of Sikolohiyang Pilipino.
First, it must be established that Sikolohiyang Pilipino is different from Sikolohiya sa Pilipinas or psychology in the Philippines and Sikolohiya ng mga Pilipino or psychology of the Filipinos. The former refers to the general form of psychology in the country, but the latter theorizes about the psychology of the Filipino. Notably, this may be from a local or foreign perspective depending on who is observing. It also considers emotions and experience knowledge, awareness of surroundings, information and understanding, habits and behavior, and the soul. Ultimately, these form psychology that studies the Filipino conscience. Salazar notes that SP has 4 affiliations, which respectively focus on the discipline as a science, a clerical matter, and an indigenous concept, and a religious psychomedical system. Its antecedents are rooted in science, philosophy, and social history. It is also focused on national identity and consciousness, social awareness and involvement, psychology of language and culture, and Filipino psychology in different areas like healthcare. These foci strengthen it as a universal discipline. As psychology stemming from the Filipino psyche, SP acknowledges the differences between Western tradition and their own. As such, it emphasizes contextualization and selectivity. Through a renewed perspective on psychology, the universal discipline is enriched. This concept is seen also as a form of protest against colonialism and Western exploitation of the masses. Likewise, SP's methodologies are contextualized to both the discipline and culture where it is used. As such, many methods of research may be undertaken to satisfy a question. Such data may also be broken into parts. This, however, does not in psychology of its humanistic feature. It can still be interpreted as a dynamic development through time and space. Connectedly, these mean that psychology is not only anchored in science, its focus on culture and history makes it an art as well. It also gives emphasis on a collective nation that has shared history and, therefore, traits. As individuals, SP believes that we develop characteristics through society and logic. Lastly, it is liberated from Western practice to fit their needs and qualities. It's also open to more areas of psychology, such as rural psychology, instead of just industrial psychology. The opening of different psychological areas also opened it to different disciplines, which may be practiced. Which may be practiced by different specialists as psychology becomes wider and more dynamic. As previously mentioned, its methodologies welcome different approaches based on different fields of study.
Development of indigenous concepts and theories. Rethinking Filipinos' values. Enriquez encouraged Filipino scholars to take a second look at these values using a Filipino orientation. Lagmay, Salazar, and Bonifacio took up the challenge in their own research. Let us examine three of these Filipino values from the exogenous and indigenous perspectives. First is the Bahala na. Bahala na has no exact English translation, but for Tomas Andres, he defines it as the Filipino attitude that makes him accept suffering and problems, leaving everything to God, or bahala ng Diyos, God will take care of us. This attitude is a fatalistic resignation or withdrawal from an engagement or crisis, or a shrinking from a personal responsibility. The Sikolohiyang Pilipino interpret it as determination and risk-taking and not fatalism. The expression is a way of bumping courage into someone's system so that they do not buckle down. Next is hiya, simply translated it as shame. Lynch view hiya as the uncomfortable feeling that accompanies awareness of being in a socially unacceptable position or performing a socially unacceptable action. Example, when an employee is scolded in front of other people. For Andres, it is an ingredient in why Filipinos overspend during fiestas in order to please their visitors, even to the extent of going into debt. Bonifacio said that the meaning of hiya depends on its form: nakakahiya, embarrassing; napahiya, placed in an awkward position; ikinahiya, be embarrassed with someone, or etc. In some affixes, it becomes negative, napahiya, or positive, mahiyain, and there's still other forms that can either be positive or negative depending on the context. Example is kahihiyan, sense of property or embarrassment. After all is said and done, Salazar concluded that the more appropriate translation for hiya in English is not shame but sense of property. Third is the utang na loob. According to Kat, it is a debt of gratitude. Andres defined it following Cott's logic as the principle of reciprocity incurred when an individual helps another. The person helped then feels an obligation to repay the debt in the future when the helper himself is in need of aid, or he may repay his debt by sending gifts. It is often not clear when a debt has been fully paid, so the relationship becomes an ongoing one. Holstener took this interpretation furthermore by claiming the recipient of the favor is forced to show his gratitude properly by returning the favor with interest. Enriquez looks more closely in the context of Filipino culture, and it actually means gratitude or solidarity. It is not absolutely obligatory in the immediate future, for the opportunity to show utang na loob might come only in the next generation, may not in your lifetime. In fact, this is expressed in a popular Filipino saying, ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. Those who do not look back to where they come from will not reach their destination. Utang na loob is a calling heard by many Filipinos who go to other lands but who still retain strong ties with their homeland. Pakikisama o pakikipagkapwa. Pakikisama was defined by Lynch as a Filipino value or maintaining smooth interpersonal relations by going along with the group or the majority of decisions, like conformity. Enriquez started unfolding the concept of kapwa as shared identity, which is at the core of Filipino social psychology, in which it is what the heart of the structure of Filipino values. He then discovered that it is not maintaining smooth interpersonal relationship that Filipinos are most concerned with, but pakikipagkapwa, which means treating the other person as kapwa or fellow human being. There are two categories of kapwa: the ibang tao, outsider, and the hindi ibang tao, or one of us. In Filipino social interaction, one is immediately placed into one of these two categories, and how one is placed determines the level of interaction one is shown. For example, if one is regarded as ibang tao, the interaction can range from the pakikitungo, transactions, civility with, to pakikisalamuha, interaction with, to pakikilahok, joining or participating, to pakikibagay, in conformity with or in accord with, and to pakikisama, being alone with. And if one is categorized as hindi ibang tao, then you can expect pakikipaglagayang loob, being in rapport, understanding, or acceptance with, or pakikisangkot, getting involved, or the highest level of pakikiisa, being one with. Using the Sikolohiyang Filipino's perspective, Enriquez reconceptualized the Filipino behavior patterns and value structures, where he designated hiya as proprietary or dignity, utang na loob, gratitude or solidarity, and pakikisama, companionship or esteem, as colonial accommodative surface values, and bahala na determination. Sama, lakas ng loob is a resentment or guts, and pakikibaka or resistance. As conformative surface values, he emphasized kapwa as shared identity as core value, pakikiramdam, shared inner perceptional as pivotal interpersonal value, and kagandahang loob, shared humanity as linking social personal value. Associated with above are social values such as karangalan, dignity, katarungan, justice, and kalayaan, freedom. Indirect communication. Part of our socialization is being sensitive to nonverbal cues, having concern for the feelings of others, being truthful but not as the expenses of hurting others people's feeling. This has made the sharpening of pakikiramdam, shared inner perception, a particularly desirable skill in many situations involving Filipino social interactions. Pakikiramdam is a request to feel, to be sensitive to. It is a shared feeling, a kind of emotional a priori. Hesitation to react, attention to subtle cues, and nonverbal behavior in mental role-playing. If I were in the other situation, how would I feel? It is a feeling for another, exercising great care and deliberation. Internality, externality. Through Salazar's analysis of indigenous history and culture of the Filipinos, he points out the internality-externality component in the Filipino personality. The Filipino language has two words for the English word honor, puri and dangal. Puri refers to honor which is physical, such as bestowed through compliments or applause for a good performance, thus external. Also refer to a virginity, which is a virtue expected of an unmarried Filipino woman. Dangal is honor within, knowledge of one's true worth, character, achievement, and success. It can be acknowledged through an award or attribute, parangal, which is actually padangal. But even without which such gestures from outside, it is within you. Thus, a poor person who is a kind and honest person and respect the dignity of hard work has a lot of dangal. A woman who was raped is not stripped of her dangal even though her puri was taken away. Other example of internality externality includes saya and ligaya for the English word happiness, pigil and timpi for control, and dama and damdam for feel. This is not to say that this external dimension is unique to the Filipinos, but this is something researchers should be conscious of when trying to understand the Filipino personality. Cultural divide. Enriquez explored one of the idea of a great cultural divide in the analysis of Filipino personality. On the other side of the cultural divide are Filipinos who have maintained a more mass-oriented worldview, culture, and way of life. They read the comics, popular illustrated magazine in Filipino, listen to soap operas on radio, watch soap operas on television, and so on. They visit the indigenous healers for both physical and mental or emotional alignments. The other side of the cultural divide are the Filipinos who have adhered to a more elitist viewpoint. They go to performance in cultural centers and theaters. They look down on people on the other side of the divide.
In this part of the report, a psychology built from Filipino experience, thought, and attitude is believed to have been strongly rooted in the Malayo-Polynesian and Asian history. The creation of indigenous psychological measures flourished following a number of research studies that used the new measurement for Filipinos, reject the strategy of connecting studies on Filipinos with Western ideas. Most research mostly focused on children and adolescents in the Philippines, resulting in improved and fresh knowledge about the Filipinos, particularly in the area of psychology. Development of indigenous research methods. Filipino psychology may be studied in a very effective way through research. Back in 1975, Carmen Santiago, UP graduate in psychology, conducted a study under Enriquez. She pursued this probe in a grouping manner. Her approach suggests that getting to know the locals and their culture before connecting with the community is not at all crucial. Traditional researchers resisted it. Then the classifying of problems to her research started to prosper. It was observed that the people continued to treat Filipinos according to Western standards. After further consideration, the more effective Filipino approach was developed. There are 5 basic guiding principles for research. First is interaction or pakikipagkapwa. Interact with the community like hindi ibang tao. It is a method of building a trusting and mutually beneficial human-to-human relationship or pakikipagpalagayang loob. Second, pagtatanong-tanong or asking questions. We must practice equity, treating everyone equally regardless of their situation in life. They should not feel like animal studies. The residents' inquiries will receive careful consideration and they must receive appropriate responses. It will greatly strengthen the bond between the researcher and the resident. Third is pagsasaalang-alang ng kapakanan or welfare of the participants. The study should be stopped if it will only jeopardize the lives of the people. When the agency learns about the community's needs, it must assist the people. Given the nature of the research, it must do more than just assist the respondents, it must also empower them. Fourth, pakikiramdam or sensitivity. People will not adjust to the method. The approach must change to fit the audience. Be mindful of the participants at all times. It has an ability to interpret nonverbal cues such as speech patterns, word choice, body language, behavior, and emotions. Last is pakikiisa or language. In order to communicate with the locals more effectively, the researchers must learn their language. If necessary, support with communication is recommended. As a result, it is believed that the individuals can completely express themselves in their native tongue. There are also some indigenous research methods that were stated, and to summarize it, unstructured interviews can aid in understanding solutions to the problems that the locals face. As people tell their stories to the researcher, trust is also developed and the researcher will be familiar with the lives and the struggles of the people in this way. Prior understanding of the local population and its culture, particularly with regard to indigenous conceptions, practices, and theories, is important. Learning to live with others involves paying attention to how other people live. People in a community might be of different types and they can have a variety of opinions. It would be excellent to get to know them better and categorize their differences. It would be admirable to visit their village after the research is complete. It would imply that the people are valued more than just study topics. One must experience those hardships firsthand in order to truly comprehend them. It is a method of understanding things by confronting the same difficulties they face on a daily basis. I will now give the virtual platform to the next reporter.
The impact of teaching psychology in the Philippines. In 1970, it was the first quarter storm when nationalism was on the rise. The academe made an effort to make the university more relevant and relatable to the masses. Dr. Lagmay, a supporter of Filipino psychological orientation, proposed teaching psychology in Filipino. Professors Freddy Gusto David and Amarilis Torres then responded. Afterward, others followed. In 1971, Enriquez returned to the Philippines, and he started translating psychological materials into Filipino. Its purpose was to give materials that would encourage Filipino as a medium of teaching in psychology. Ultimately, more psychological materials were published in Filipino. However, students avoided Filipino psychology classes at first because of its novelty. In 1978, Sikolohiyang Filipino was opened as a subject in UP, after being taught only as a special topics course. There were problems in acquiring resources and literature, such that there was a lack of textbooks to be used, and articles were not in one place. Therefore, the first batch of students focused on identifying and binding materials. Then, in 1982, the next batch of students indexed and published the bound materials through the book Sikolohiyang Pilipino, Teorya, Metodo at Gamit. At this time, English is still dominant, but Filipino is starting to be seen as an academic language too. In the present time, most classes in psychology are delivered in Filipino, and more students used Filipino in research. Sikolohiyang Pilipino opened to creative and rounded discussions in the academe, and it also became an area of concentration in UP's PhD in psychology program.
Areas of application of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. The early stages of Sikolohiyang Pilipino focus on psychology instruction, research, and conference organization. This inspired the mass media to use the local language and invite Filipino psychologists on radio programs, talk shows, and other events. This led to some popularity, giving Filipinos insight in the principles of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. There were attempts to formulate techniques and therapies suited to the Filipino personality. In 1978, Bulatao made observations regarding counseling in the Philippines. For example, Filipinos feel more at ease when speaking among a sympathetic group of friends than when speaking one-on-one. Second, Filipinos favor paternalistic counselors who direct and instruct them over non-directive ones. And lastly, Filipino subjects are more susceptible to hypnotic suggestions and entering an altered state of consciousness than American subjects. On another note, Sikolohiyang Pilipino is also used in children's therapy, especially for children who experienced armed conflict, prostitution, and many more. In 1985, pioneering efforts by Elizabeth Vitesio Marcelino and her colleagues from the Children's Rehabilitation Center focused on the relevance of SP by examining the child client's specific needs and problems and understanding the socio-economic and political roots of the problem and its consequences for the child's welfare. Next, in terms of feminist psychology, the principles of Sikolohiyang Pilipino helped Filipino women understand their problems in terms of how social-cultural conditions affect them in Philippine society. SP principles are also utilized in industries by marketing specific products, studying consumer behavior, training company staff, and many more. Lastly, various non-governmental organizations have trained communities on SP to enable them to grasp the fundamentals of grassroots leadership in Filipino communities. Enrique spearheaded several activities in defining the characteristics and perspectives of SP. The PSSP, or the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, conducted its first conference in 1975 to discuss the state of psychology in the Philippines. This resulted in annual conferences held throughout the country to promote Filipino thought and develop a broader national perspective on psychology. Enriquez also helped in the formation of organizations in specific fields such as child psychology, art psychology, language and history psychology, and so on. The spread of Sikolohiyang Pilipino outside the Philippines. Enrique visited many places and had the opportunity to teach, do research, and attend international conferences. Various groups and associations were established in numerous countries to assist the goals of SP by influencing academics abroad. Though many of these organizations are no longer active, there are still a number of individuals who believe in the values of Sikolohiyang Pilipino.
Universal psychology is based on the psychology of industrialized and developed countries of the West. It emphasizes what is directly observable, measurable, and quantifiable. Its goal is to generalize research findings. It seeks to apply Western theories and methods to non-Western societies and cultures. It is assumed that all human beings are the same and their context in time and space is not important. Doing it became the psychology by which all other psychologies are judged. The textbook used to teach psychology students was Introduction to Psychology, but the correct title perhaps should be Introduction to American Psychology. Universal psychology is perhaps a vision than a reality. It is viewed as a step in the direction of creating a psychology that is genuinely universal. Sikolohiyang Pilipino attempts not only to test hypotheses based on Western theories but rather to generate its own set of hypotheses, theories, and body of knowledge. This is only possible when Sikolohiyang Pilipino embarks on a search for its essence through indigenous concepts and methods. Through the discovery and use of indigenous concepts and methods, Sikolohiyang Pilipino is contributing to a truly universal psychology which is based on a new set of principles. First, diversity, because it is a psychology that is drawn from the experiences and particularities of various countries and cultures. Second, equality, because it respects these various psychologies as equally valid, important, and relevant and does not attempt to impose its ideas on others. Sikolohiyang Pilipino has long been at the forefront of that process through the expression and clarification of novel ideas and approaches that have been deemed significant not only for Filipinos but also for some Asian civilizations.